Good morning. My name is Pierre-Henri de MENTHON. I'm chief editor in the Challenge magazine. Congratulations for your presence this morning. Actually much better than the afternoon, because for those who were here yesterday know what it's all about. So, great panel today. David BOSCO, Cercle des Économistes, who will introduce the issue of digital law. It's very confused, and we'll try to work out. Christel HEYDEMANN, Director General of Orange, Axelle LEMAIRE, you number 2 of French Red Cross, and you, in a previous life, you were in charge of the digital industry in the French government. Gianmarco MONSELLAto, you're the manager of Deloitte France. Jacques BIOT, former president of Polytechnics and now president of Huawei France, and Olivier SICHEL, who is number 2 in the Caisse de dépôt and still fascinated by the digital issues. David, tell us, give us a summary of everything that has been going on for the last few months and what is to be expected in terms of regulation for the businesses. So, how to build a European digital sovereignty? Well, first, set the stage. This is something we hear about in the public debate, European digital sovereignty. Well, let's start by saying that sovereignty, means that you have power, you have control, you control your realm or your domain, and this invitation to discuss the constitution or the setting up of a European sovereignty, well, it's simply because it's missing. It has been actually organized by foreign Chinese and US corporations. You all know them. I'll spare you the details. And those US and Chinese corporations actually have full power over digital markets. So what should be the reaction of Europe? What should they do? What should we do? Well, first of all, we should have several sovereignties in the European discussion. First, there is a conventional sovereignty, which comes from the top, public authority, basically setting up, organizing a regulation to, it's not prohibiting. We want to regulate some system less democratic than ours, could have thought about dismantling these corporations. We decided to actually regulate, and the intention was to redistribute sovereignty between various players and to give a new form of leverage to public authorities. It's not limited to the digital world. A few weeks ago, the European Commission just got an agreement between the European Parliament and the European Council to make sure that foreign state could control some corporation in order to protect the European interest. But now we've seen an amazing abundance of text to regulate the GAFAM market power. Can't be exhaustive, but the 2018 directive SMA on content and media, in order to regulate the pluralism of media. Closer to us, there is the platform to business, which is there to introduce transparency in the operation of platforms. Digital Market Act and Digital Services Act in 2022, which set a regulation, ex-ante regulation among jurists to impose structuring obligations to digital corporations and make sure that they would not impose and that they will not block the European markets. And of course, soon, the Data Act, the Data Government act that will regulate the utilization of data, especially with the Internet of Things, and the Artificial Intelligence Act, which will come up in 2023. So many texts and documents. Well, let me make two comments. First, as a jurist, as a legal expert, in Europe, we've created a regulatory maze. I mean, the intentions were good, but the implementation thereof is very complicated. Companies already know the implementation constraint for the RGPD, for the DMA, for Data Act. It will be something quite constraining and binding. But the second observation, what is the meaning of this public regulation? Is there a European plan? Is there some kind of a specific intention? Well, let me say that several ideas will govern this European regulation. Two are worthy of attention. First, it is essential for Europe to assert its values, European values, and to impose them to the foreign operators. The fight against hate messages, hate speeches, for the pluralism of media, for loyalty in the operation of digital services. Well, assuming that they were in danger. But there is a second intention, which in my opinion is as important, is, let's say, to redistribute value. These digital companies have agreed advertising value. And Europe wants to redistribute and to replace some value in the economy to the benefit of European companies. This is well, you may think what you want, to redistribute value to the benefit of European companies, fair enough, but it's not an industrial project per se. It's not that's, you know, redistributing value means that it's not a project. So we should, beside this sort of a conventional public order sovereignty, which gives leverages to the public authority, a second form of sovereignty is important in Europe now, which comes from the bottom. It's a bottom-up, that is of the players of the digital world or industry. And I'm mentioning two. First, the users of digital services. We need to understand that European regulations, and the RGPD was the general regulation on data protection, was the first, the one to put the regulator at the to give a user control over personal data that will be communicated to the platform and the digital operators, and therefore to have control. And they want to do what, you know, the GDPR means that you have to, whoever is processing data has to ask for the consent of the user for the utilization of the data and to respect the end purpose of the transfer. The Data Act and the Data Government Act coming are with the same line. Basically, they want to give control of the user over data, especially in the field of the Internet of Things. Now, dimension is to give power sovereignty to the user, and this user becomes a player of European sovereignty. Second aspect, the sovereignty of European companies. Can we actually give power in this competition game, in this digital competition game, to the European companies? This is a huge task for Europe. It's an aspect. It has to do with industrial policy. Can we reinforce? Are we able to reinforce the competitive capabilities of our European companies to, you know, face up to the US and Chinese corporations? We've not been always that good in Europe. You know, you remember the failure of the merger between Alstom and Siemens, you know, and the European regulation was actually, maybe it could be blocking the advent of champions. Lots of work to be done, but we should congratulate the initiative of the European Commission. Let me give you one example for time purposes. When it comes to artificial intelligence, a couple of years ago, in 2020, the European Commission announced a massive investment plan in AI. The idea being to say that we lost the war of platform, we have to win the next war on AI, and the European strategy will be implemented. Let me close with one word. power to European corporation is a good thing, but how do we deal with the agreements, industrial agreements that could be signed between European companies and US companies, for example? That has been discussed with the cloud services and the agreements Google signed with some operators. Is it a way? Is it to give more power to European companies? Well, in my opinion, it is clear that European companies must have some sovereignty keys in their hand. Thank you, David. Very clear. You said it yourself. You're in a job full of future, you know, an expert in digital law. This is going, you know, things are complicated, but now we better understand what you've said. Now, end users have a role to play, a key role to play in the which strategy. The outlines are coming up, you know, they have to be autonomous and responsible as to the utilization of their own data. So, you know the users, Christel HEYDEMANN. What is your strategy in this domain? When we come from Orange, our mission, we want to be the trusted player that will give each user the key to be a responsible player. So Orange is that. And how do we educate our customers, or consumers, that is, as well as businesses? And it's even more complicated when you're a company. Of course, consumers and their regulation, the GDPR protects, well, we all click, you know, to accept cookies and so on and so forth because we don't have time. We don't really have access to our private data. So we trust, actually, the companies. So this is why Orange has to be the trusted actor when it comes to protection, especially cybersecurity. And for businesses, well, how do we help them to help them understand what data they can use, where the data is stored, what are the extraterritoriality rules, especially when it comes to create trusted clouds, which is an initiative that we rely on with technological partners who are foreign partners. But it is true that if we are to look at the equation, and that was said, the digital sovereignty means that strategic autonomy. And in order to remain a trusted player when you are Orange, you have to be strong, you have to be able to invest. And in Europe today, operators, and it's not specific to Orange, well, we're in a situation when we have to invest into infrastructures because there is a huge growth in traffic. It should multiply by 3 or 5 in the next 6 years. And it is basically taken by major players, 5 players, who force us to invest. And the challenge of sovereignty, well, educate our clients, but work with the players who would actually drive some behaviors. Now, there's been a call from large managers for energy sobriety, you know, Orange and others. Could you launch a call for digital sobriety? Because everybody uses lots of passband for, you know, not really useful reasons. So couldn't we imagine this approach? Well, but, you know, to make people more responsible about their data. Well, digital today is a very limited part of energy consumption. For us, the role is to educate among the players of the digital to build a digital world that will not increase the energy consumptions. So digital sobriety, I don't think that in the European values of the digital world, we intend to limit, constrain utilization. The freedom of digital utilization is very important in European regulation. So we don't want people to have the feeling that we want to break the digital use in Europe. No, not great idea for you. Doesn't mean that we should invite people to, but we have to invite people to be responsible in their usage, but, you know, but we don't want anything that would affect the utilization of digital in Europe. Axelle LEMAIRE. It is kind of an awareness of digital use by users in Europe. Yes, clear cut. If we had had this roundtable 10 years ago, we would not have used the same word. Sovereignty was a rude word, you know, dirty word. When the Minister of Productive Recovery wanted to oppose the purchase of Dailymotion by Yahoo, yeah, we consider it was too intrusive. So sovereignty would mean closing markets. Yes, we would prohibit Huawei in France. Yes, we would stop TikTok in France, as the Indians did, which enable India to have about 10, 20 Indian TikToks. But it means as well, well, we can no longer export our wine. We can no longer export our yeah, well, this is, yeah. So I think the French and European position is that of defending a strategic autonomy. And there is this notion of freedom of choice. The real issue here is that we don't have a choice, and we all schizophrenic, actually. Digital services, be they app shops, markets, social networks, it seems we feel it's free, and we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose easy access to tools and platforms so easy to use, which in fact are free, against a very theoretical notion. Young graduates who are now rebelling on the campus of grandes écoles, you know, they want to fight for the environment and not for the digital freedom. So what the freedom of choice means that there is a European notion of regulation. Anglo-Saxons consider that regulation is intrusive. You enforce regulatory constraint that will affect the growth of businesses. In Europe, regulations are the conditions to gain access to a market and to use tools, and the use of tools by consumers which provide a better opening and a freedom of choice. Back to GDPR, well, we didn't say it, but it is first and foremost there to protect the private life of citizens. A decision of the Rovers versus Wade's Supreme Court decision, which was challenged recently, it was based on the respect of private life. This is what we're talking about. Whereas the positive effect was that a huge awareness taking of the protection for personal data. But today, it is still halfway. Sorry. Can you tell us what was this decision, the justice decision you've just talked about? Well, okay, what's the relation? But just to tell you that there is a basis of fundamental value of human values and human rights, which impact private life, and that was the decision made by the Supreme Court in the US, which authorizes states to come back to the prohibition to the right of abortion for women. And it is based on private life, and digital players react. Google, for example, removed all the geolocalization background to make sure that they will not be sued if they go from one state to another to get an abortion. So this is what the GDPR is all about. So once we've said that, today, the GDPR is not fully intuitive. Maybe we're tired of pressing a key or to say yes, no, accept cookies and the utilization of my personal data. We could go further in the ergonomy, and we should give power to the citizens. What makes the strength? Why are the GAFAM so strong? Because they use massive collective data, and they can do predictive analysis and then send them back to the consumers, use them. So there should be a citizen collective force. That is, we should introduce group class action when we want to contest some practice from the digital giants. Today we are alone. We're an addition of individuals versus those big corporations. Tomorrow we should together be able to take them to court. Jean-Marc BIOT. Yes, you did part of your career in Brussels. You know the operation of Gianmarco. Sorry. So, no. How do you analyze this deluge of recommendation? And even you know, when legal expert talks about a maze or a chaos, so what do you see? How do you see this situation now? Well, there is indeed a regulation, and I close that. But first and foremost, I think the risk of Europe is to think of itself as a kind of an arbiter of a referee for the digital match, and a referee never wins a match. So regulation will not solve everything. It is essential, but it does not suffice. Digital sovereignty will only exist if Europe can master the digitalization of economy. The economy is the digital is everywhere, and I have three convictions here. First one is that truly when we talk about digital, we talk about data, and each manager should have a data strategy. It's not just a technical issue of just managing an information system. Early on, we talked about 25. On the 25th of March, when President Biden and President van der Leyen did the common speech on the European soil about the war in Ukraine, what do they talk about? They talk about the war in Ukraine, they talk about the refugees, they talk about the hydrocarbon crisis, and they talk about data. Historic and strategic data. If it is a strategic domain, well, it should be the same for any business manager. So how do I get data and how do I enrich data? Raw data has no value. What has value is the enriched, processed, calculated data with huge systems that are cross-border. You know, when you're a country like France, you know, we need. This is where I come to a second idea that digital sovereignty will only exist if in France we catch up on the cloud. We like to have the processing power, computing power. We have to invest in the cloud rapidly. A study of the member of the Cercle des Économistes, Christel HEYDEMANN, says companies which adopt the cloud have a growth rate 1.5% higher than the others, and the investment for we need 16 billion to invest in the cloud development. The adoption of cloud in businesses is 16%. European Union is 36%. Germany 33%. If we don't catch up, the discussion of digital sovereignty will be a theoretical discussion of academics. So there is a true challenge of migration, and the last challenge is that of the computing power. We lost the power of the battle of the internet. We lost the battle of the digital platform. If we want to be a player of the digitalization of economy, quantic calculation, we have announced a 1.8 billion investment in quantic digital systems. We have to play at the same level as the corporations in the US, and I'll talk about regulation discourse, which is relevant and very strong in Europe, but clearly will gain its full power if we once in Europe we can be the referee and the player, then we'll win the match. There you go. No, so digital is cloud, is soft, but it is also hard. You know, equipment. Huawei is a champion, global champion in this domain. So we know that there's been a lot of controversies and discussions. We talked about sovereignty. So indeed, it concerns the GAFAM, the US, but also the Chinese. A lot of discussions as well about the fact that President of Polytechnics could become President of Huawei France. Now, how did you experience that? And where do we stand in this sovereignty of hardware? Because software needs the software needs hardware. We need towers and so on and so forth to run and process data.
Well, first of all, thank you to the Economists to welcome me as an industrial partner after having invited me as an intellectual guest, as the President said, and as the Huawei President, but also as a rapporteur on drugs, because this is a sensitive issue. This is the mission that Edouard Philippe gave me. I would like to remind you that it's not a matter of being completely independent, of having autarky. It's not possible in terms of equipment. We always go back to entrants that are raw materials. We have oil, we have rare metals, a lot of things. And yesterday there was a very interesting roundtable on materials. And we can't close our borders and live on our own. This is something that we can. What is sovereignty? If it's not autarky, then what is it? It's something that Axelle has said, namely the capacity not to be weak when we are attacked. I see three pillars for this, for a country to keep It's digital sovereignty, and it's sovereignty in terms of equipment as well. The first pillar is science. If you look at countries which are small states, and nobody challenges that they are actually sovereign states, like Switzerland, they have invested in research and science. And the key for our country, and that's actually the previous president of the school that is talking, when we see that we have lost important people in Israel. I think it's a pity. Why did we see the departure of CRISP and messenger RNA leave? We have to invest in R&D, in fundamental research, and this is why HURA is so resilient, because our founding president actually trusts fundamental science. We go towards the border and over the borders, and then we try to see the applications for the society. We can develop that later on, but this is the fundamental science, very important. But there was actually a question, that's actually a comment. How can we have digital sovereignty versus in Europe versus actually the Chinese digital sovereignty that actually has invested so much in science and R&D? Well, we have a president of university that actually worked with HURA, that's 14th in Shanghai ranking, and I think we have to put the emphasis on research, especially on fundamental research. 22% of our turnover actually is invested in this. It's something that is very important. The second element also is sovereignty of access to entrance, procurement policy, and this deals with everything that has to do with digital, but competition is very important. We have to keep competitiveness. For drugs, it was the same. When there's a shortage, when we have a complicated production chain, we have monopolies, and we have to make sure that there are no monopolies, may it be for oils or others. There should be not only one or two markets, because when one is falls short, then we have nothing. For Huawei, for instance, we never wanted to claim a monopoly. In any country, we have no market share that could actually exceed 50%. And competition is something that is very healthy. We trust it, and we like to be on the same competition with some of our competitors. There's no sovereignty if you are dependent on one single supplier. And we need to have acceptance from the society for this. A country is not sovereign when we have this, when a technology cannot be brought up, when it's criticized by a part of society. We cannot reach that. We have a lot of efforts to make on our side. We're doing a lot to go against electronic illiteracy, because actually 1 person out of 6 actually does not know anything about the internet. We still have people who can't actually fill their tax returns because it is done on the computer, for instance. This is a real problem. So we need to have agreements to equip trucks to go in the neighborhood to educate people who have no access to the digital world. This is very important. We need to have some generosity, first of all. We need to support startups, and we also need to respect the environment. This is very important for the development with operators. We have collaborations to make sure that digital world could consume as little as possible, because they consume a lot of energy. And we need to concentrate on solar energy with data centers. We have a lot of projects. We need to have transparency. And I would like to invite you to actually visit our transparency center, where you can check out all our materials, and you can see there's no mics, there's no chips, nobody's listening to you. And to go back to this matter of sovereignty, I would like to quote Pascal, which is very important. Since we could only do what was fair, and we could only do what was fair, and this is why we actually did it. Huawei, it's 10% actually in turnover. What does it mean? In R&D, we have 100 billion turnover overall, so that's actually a lot amount of money. That's $10 billion that are invested in fundamental research. Yeah. Olivier, it's your turn. So you are actually a high official at the Caisse des Dépôts. You were always a strong partisan of freedom in the digital world. So can you recall us a little bit? When you talked about the previous convictions of Google, what about it? Can you tell? It was actually an abuse of market that was actually very much quite important. Overnight, Google had a directory of all the websites, and Google Shopping was the first in its ranking, and this is why it was convicted to 1.7 billion penalty, because this was actually an abusive position, because they start with the shopping browsers, and then they made the comparisons with insurance and with the hotel industry, and this was actually stopped. This is why regulations actually allow us to protect European companies, because if they invest in R&D, but if you have predatory behavior, this is what we had with Google, then you won't make it. And this is why I have built a think tank, Digital Deal it's called, to find this third venue to have a European group of important internet companies to respect our values, to make sure that they're respected in terms of data and privacy as well. And we just published, this is on our digital website, a report on GDPR Act 3 that was actually mentioned by Axelle. And we can see surprising data. For instance, if you have a Scandinavian gay meeting dating website, you can see where these data go. In GDPR, we can actually see where these data come from. And if you see on the value chain all the people that intervene, you have aggregators, you have stakeholders, operators, and these are actually sensitive data. For instance, if you want to have Moscow's schedule hours, so that means that all this is useless, right? All these regulations. Is that what you mean? Well, in my opinion, we have an asymmetry between the large corporations which do respect, which comply with GDPR. I'm sure that with Orange this is the case. And the websites. You have websites and applications which do not respect it, which do not comply with regulations. If we say, I accept or I refuse, and with the checkbox, can you have any guarantees that actually everything is respected? If with Act 2 of GDPR, we have to make sure, because we don't have the time, we click, yes, I accept, or no, I refuse, but you have people, lawyers, for instance, who will have class actions, who will make sure and check out how this is made. We'll make tracking of data and see whether everything is respected. I would like to speak as a witness somehow on the setting up of GDPR. It was a disaster for the information sites. We had to spend a lot of money to set up all this. We are not the most important, we're not the wealthiest corporations. We are 80% of GAFA, so to say. These are actually the main sources of income. So we depend on this, and all these regulations induced us to invest with our little means. And we're very much monitored. Every time that something happens, we have to have subscriptions. We actually have to sign letters of engagements with lawyers to be protected. And to sum up, we're a bit, not to say that we're anti-GAFA, it actually touches upon other stakeholders in the digital world that are not the ones that we could have considered at first. That's just a piece of thought. There's just a little contribution and input from me. I would like to go back to the wonderful formula of Gianmarco. The arbitrator, the umpire doesn't win the match. With what we have in Europe, the answer is no, actually, right now. We'll start with Olivier, as the official of Caisse des Dépôts, you had to invest in most of the largest European digital disasters relates to GAFA. What is your feedback on this? Do you think that it's a curse? Are we the best empire in the world? And so, since we're the best empire, we can't win the match. Is this your opinion? Well, we have Dr. Lieb. That's one of the investments. That was actually a huge failure. Nobody used it ever. We shouldn't have a round of applause for Dr. Lieb, yes, because there's also Soitec as fundamental research, which is a wonderful success, and then others that are pending. But what are we doing concretely? France has done wonderful work to try to give value to research scientists and to have some venture capital at a large size. And this works well. Growth works well. What we're working on, and this was actually a big announcement we made recently, is to have also IPOs. And this goes through finding loads of large investors with the Caisse des Dépôts, and also Euronext tech leader. I'm the administrator of Euronext, and the Caisse des Dépôts is the first investor. And within a European logic, because we have the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, you have also large unicorns in Brussels, in Paris, in Berlin, and now in Milan. We want to favor these IPOs. But we have to have a regulatory framework. The last one we did, and you're right to be skeptical, is DISA. It was done, and it didn't go that well, we have to say. There are not a lot of IPOs that went well recently, we have to say. OVH, that's one, it didn't go that well, we have to say. That was not actually a wonderful success. But with those tech companies, it's not easy, especially on NASDAQ, it's not only in Europe, no. But let's just imagine a DISA where there would be no regulation that could hinder Apple from doing the bundle with Apple Music. And Apple would actually have the same behavior as for Google. They say, okay, DISA is good, but you won't find it on iPhone because I don't like it and I have Apple Music. There would be no future for DISA. And this is where we are betting on this. We have to have a regulatory framework. We're working with the DSA and the DMA to help these startups and to make sure that there's actually a loyal competition. We should be free to invest in DISA and to be able to compete on an equal footing. I would like to have a follow-up on this. Should we have a better regulation? We've talked about the fact that we should be umpires, but should we have a better regulation to have European leaders to try to promote it? A better regulation could allow us to give some place to European operators, but it's not enough. DMA, for instance, is an answer that could have some pros, as you said earlier. For instance, should Google favor only its own products? That could actually give some leeway for the European actors, but we should have a full-fledged European industry, a European policy. And equality of chances will not be enough, in my opinion. Also, your environment, Christel, is actually a market with a huge competition. We always talk about restructuring because there are too many operators. What is your point of view on this issue of creation of champions of European merit? Does it exist? Will it exist one day, or should we focus on other things? Well, when you're a telecom operator, we have to see that Europe is not one market. And we have as many regulators as countries. And the policy in Europe aims at having 4 operators per country, where we have 3 in the US and 3 in China. And so the relationship with the GAFAMs are actually quite different. And we, as European operators, we work hand in hand together to make sure that we have innovation for the future. We also deploy infrastructures like fiber, because France is actually the country which has most fiber as compared to others, and we invest much more than GAFA actually. Less in R&D, but more in infrastructures. So the capacity to keep that is critical. It's very important. And what is at stake, and when we talk about strategy, the aim is not fighting on the markets of yesterday, but the markets of the future. We have to have digital worlds in the factories, in the transportation, everywhere. And we have champions in Europe that are industrial champions for software and so on. And we have to make sure that we can continue to invest in infrastructures that will enable these champions to work in an ecosystem to build this digital world that will not be the search online digital world. And the industrial data or the B2B world are actually colossal. And we have to work on this. We have to think this through. But the horizon shouldn't be 2025, but 2030 and beyond. You were talking about competition with Huawei. How can we have European digital champions, especially on the industrial side? So the hat of you should be the president of the Polytechnique, the School of Engineers. When we talk about internal sovereignty of equipment, and when we have a factory in Alsace, for instance, 300 jobs, the aim is to bring back the value chain in the most European way, because we are actually the most European one for 4G and 5G. It is really important to develop applications, and Europe can actually do it, can still do it. We have in aeronautics, in nuclear energy, in food industry, we have champions that actually can make it. We've talked about it yesterday in a wonderful roundtable. They all are facing the same issues when we talk about the growth of growths. Alors, going down on growth is not easy. We need to have an economy. We need to have something to do with energy. The only way to make it and to keep our companies aligned is to make sure that the production processes are more efficient, and this will go via digital transition. We need to have collaborations with those that work on equipments, those that set up these equipments, not only in the public sector. Large operators are not the only ones. We also work with the industrial sector. We are developing equipment for the industrial sector, and the European sovereignty will go through a digital transition of the industry. Axelle LEMAIRE, is there a midterm? Is there between talking about sovereignty and being just a battlefield for the digital world between the GAFA and China? How can we actually have digital champions and leaders? We have no choice, actually, to have this midway. Look at the world. Look at the geostrategic tensions. Do we want to have a bipolar bloc that would sum up at a battle between the US and China? No. And this is why this has actually consequences on the choices that we need to make. I'm actually not defeatist. I've seen a lot of beautiful promises on the digital world for industrial applications, but also in terms of cybersecurity, in green tech as well, all the solutions for sustainable development in health, the med tech as well. The first issue is access to European markets, because paradoxically, when startups start scaling up, and they want to scale up, they go towards the US, because there's a huge market before even deploying into neighboring countries. My conviction is that the development of the automatic translation by AI should be actually an opportunity for these startups, because then the costs will actually decrease strongly, and they will not have to adapt everything into 27 languages, and that definitely will facilitate deployment in Europe. But also there's a matter of the investment. This is a condition precedent. We are aware of it. It's not enough also in fundamental research. The Caisse des dépôts and consignation feeds a lot of companies for application and operational investment, but not a lot of investment is done in fundamental research. There's actually a huge divide in what is going on in corporations between the public sector and the large corporations, and we should actually go over and beyond this issue and solve it once and for all to make sure that we're up to our ambitions. As for the cloud, I think we haven't said our last word. We always say that between Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, there's no other choice. Well, it's not true. We have Scaleway, LVH Cloud, Clever Cloud. There are other operators in Germany. What we lack is actually education. There are a lot of IT directors that say that they are all for the sovereignty, but they do not actually assume their choice. But in terms of technology, what we're selling to them is not perfect, indeed. It's not really the same as what Amazon can do, but if we give a chance to these actors, to these stakeholders, and collectively we really go for it, then they can actually scale up. It's not really fashionable, but I would like to ask a question. Let's say that I'm the head of the French government and I'm giving a mission to Deloitte. Where should we invest? We can't do everything at once. Research on internet, it might be complicated to create a European digital champion, but are there fields where we should speed up investment? I still have a few billions to invest because nobody cares about the budget deficit for now. So where should I put my money right now, immediately? We have 5 minutes. You have 1 minute. You have 1 minute and a half left. As I had time, first of all, I think we should invest in quantum. That's in quantum. In quantum, this is very important. 1.8. It goes from 1 to 1,000 fold. That actually will make the difference. That will give a cutting edge to the Amazon of this world. It's not the cloud. It's all the applications, all the power of calculation that comes from it. So quantum calculation is very important. And we should invest in this in Europe to make sure that Europe is a leader in this field. Then we should invest in universities, in also university research to have fundamental research. This is where we are actually lacking and we're lagging behind. And also capital markets. They have a lot of public procurement in the US and their capital logic is there. This is why most of the leaders go to the US, because they have capital markets that Europe does not have, and we're not on equal footing there in terms of competition. If we in Europe manage to have capital markets, to create capital markets on this, then we will have this sovereignty. In your strategy, Mrs. HEYDEMANN, where do you place your focus? Are you aligned with what was said? In which sectors do you think should be #1 in the future? Where could you be a champion? Well, cybersecurity is important. We need to protect consumers and corporations in a world that is more and more digital, and there's a lot of threats growing. So we're already a European leader in that field, but we continue to invest in that field. But also infrastructures for the next generations. We've done a lot in fiber. We continue to do so throughout Europe, but also 5G, because this is at the heart of our strategy. Thank you very much, Christel. I thank you all. And I will now let Olivier SICHEL wrap up, because he has a lot of positions. And it's interesting to listen to him. He's a proactive partisan of the digital world, but he's also an investor now. So where should we place our focus, in your opinion, in the years to come, or in the months to come, now that we have a lot of money, let's say? Well, cybersecurity, we've just published an important memo, because this is a sector for the future, and we need to have the courage to impose the rules of our game and our rules. And I would like to follow up on what was said. Cybersecurity is very important because it's a major cost. It's a major investment. They keep on investing in firewalls and patches because they have problems with software. When you have a problem with a car and there's a defect, then actually the brand manufacturer will recall all their cars and then repair them. But when there are vulnerabilities in software world, then it's up to the corporations to pay and to have their own patches. It should be up to Microsoft and all the digital giants to do so. Well, you're talking about the American ones, but the European ones should do so as well. Well, that's the game. We have to know what are the strengths and weaknesses, the balance of powers to impose the rules of our game. And I really actually focused on that subject. And you have said it, it's not by being an empire that you can win the match. We have won our bet in terms of unicorns. We have actually exceeded our objectives. But also the environment has changed drastically. The digital world was the matter of startups and the large corporations before. Large industrial groups, Schneider, L'Oréal, they are very much into the digital transition, and now they're changing. And they try to be at the cutting edge of this transition. So I'm very optimistic for Europe. It's both humanist and it also actually relies on our values. Thank you. We'll wrap up on this very optimistic note. I would like to thank the whole panel for their attendance and inputs. Thank you very much.